Okay, we are 2 weeks into the new marketplace since we've been adapting to the changes that National Association of Realtors has put together relating to sellers and the discussion of compensation, and with buyers and the discussion about signing some kind of written agreement prior to taking a look at property. And we're going to break down what that looks like now in our marketplace: agent-to-agent interaction, client-to-agent interaction, new forms, as we sort of break down what's happening in the Lowcountry marketplace here in South Carolina. So let's get after it. All right, Chris, so it's been 2 weeks since these National Association of Realtor guidelines have come down. The changes are now afoot in our marketplace. And we just thought, you know what, for our viewers, let's just kind of have some back and forth banter about what we've been seeing, what the impact is for buyers, for sellers, for agents, for process. And, you know, I'll kind of kick off. And I think that the thing that I've seen, and we've been talking about internally at Collins Group, is what I call the 3 T's, which is time, talent, and talk. And so basically taking more time to talk with buyers and sellers, and frankly, between agents, is super important to talk, talking through these topics, these issues, and making sure there's a clear understanding with transparency about sort of what the implication is. And by the way, the implication is not, there's just a couple of changes that NAR pushed down and all of a sudden we got to abide by it. There's this deep flow of different forms that have come about and processes that are happening, and everybody's trying to figure that out. And then the third T is talent. I think it's really causing everybody to step up their game and express their understanding. In some cases, and we've seen this, a lack of understanding. Hey, let's just be transparent about what this topic is, what the implication is, and how do we kind of work through it. And so with those 3 T's, that's kind of what we've been practicing internally. And let's kind of move that over. Let's talk about the seller side. We're engaging with sellers, having the conversation, and I'll kind of tee this up for you, is when we just did our recent seller workshop, at a certain point during the workshop, I said, hey, just a question to the audience. Had about maybe 30 or so folks there. I said, what have you heard about the changes in real estate recently? And it was interesting. It's always interesting. A lot of people just sat on their hands. and I think that's because people sometimes are shy. I said, no, it's okay. I really just kind of want to hear. Yeah. And then what I got was maybe 6 or 7 partial answers. Like, well, I've kind of heard there was a lawsuit. I kind of heard that, sellers don't necessarily have to pay a buyer commission. I kind of heard that this is flexible, that's flexible. And as I kind of pieced all those 6 or 7 ones together, they kind of had the majority of the picture figured out, but there was still a lot of misunderstanding and some folks that had never heard the topic before. So that was kind of interesting to me. So let's talk about that on the seller side. When you're using the 3 T's, extra time to talk and kind of using your talent or expertise, what's that looking like right now? What are sellers wanting to hear? What are they hearing or wanting to kind of conclude?
Well, the market is experiencing distraction right now. Okay. I mean, that's the key thing, and that's for buyers and sellers. Mm-hmm. And with distraction, I ran some numbers today, and new listings the month of August of 2023 compared to the month of August of 2024, when we're having all this distraction, new listings down 18% market-wide. Yeah. Now, we've been really busy. Our listings are up 22%, but if you look at the whole marketplace, homes and villas. So with market distraction, it just requires more talking, like you said, and more strategic planning. What is actually happening? Mm-hmm. What's the playing field look like? Is so important. These forms that have been flooding into our industry in the last 2 weeks, or during the past month, that are still changing, it seems like daily, but these new forms, all these new requirements, the playing field is different. So if you don't understand the playing field, right, if you just step out onto the field and you're like, okay, now what are the rules? You're not going to come out ahead.
100%. I think about an on-site consultation for us with the seller, which is akin to a buyer strategy session with our buyer clients. Just prepare for a longer meeting because there's just more meat to it. And when I think about that, what I'm finding is that sellers are wanting to understand They're trying to digest what they've heard, maybe what they've heard from neighbors, maybe now a little bit more what they're hearing from the market, certainly national news and that sort of thing. And we've always been talking about this compensation strategy and how that's kind of enveloped in a pricing strategy too. It's all about numbers. And honestly, for a seller, it's all about the net, right? Sort of like, what are my net proceeds that I'm really looking at? And what's going to be the best way for me to get there? And that's not just about compensation or what should I ask. It's about condition. Should I make an investment for, the way the property shows? How do I prep the property, et cetera? It's all packaged in a much more dynamic, I think, very transparent, and to me, a very compelling conversation with sellers.
Yeah, sellers, we're spending more time in the living rooms this past week with folks that are not just selling now, but they're thinking about selling down the road. And what's interesting is when anything nationally hits hard, especially a big industry, the news media bombards it right then and there. And they do that a lot of times. They want to be the first one to announce what's happening. Well, what happens in that situation is they might not have all they might not have all the answers. They might not have all the facts. They might not, and as things are changing and fluid and things like that, they're going to hit the market or they're going to hit the airways really hard and fast early on, which is what's happened.
Yes.
That has created a lot of confusion.
Of course it has.
Okay. Yeah. And so what I expect is now it's a little bit old news. However, it's relevant news. So what's going to happen is the news media and everything like that's going to kind of taper away. Now they're going to look for the next hot topic, and then I bet it's going to be something about an election.
Sure.
So that's what all the focus and energy, but the reality is this, the playing field has changed.
Yes.
So it's really important to have those, if you're a buyer or a seller, to have those strategic consultations with your agent and find out what's changed, what your opportunities are, how are you best going to structure your position, whether you're listing or purchasing.
Sure.
How are you going to best do that?
Yeah, and what's the best way to achieve your goal? I mean, that's the main thing. And, among all of this that's happening, and I've still got my raspy voice because literally over these last couple of weeks, we've been talking, we've been training, we've been educating, etc. And I think that all of it is, while we're dealing with all that, it's critical to stay the course of achieving buyer and seller goals. In other words, selling real estate, connecting buyers and sellers on properties is hugely important because you can get caught in these little side eddies and get a little confused, a little distracted, but that's not really what's best for buyers and sellers. What they want is, bring me up to speed on these topics. What's the implication to me? And let's get on with it because I want to buy, I want to sell.
That's right. Yeah. Don't get caught up in kind of the buzz off to the side and forget your objective.
Correct.
What's your objective? Buying or selling? It's just so important not to get mixed up in all the static out there.
100%. And so, I think what we're finding too is that some of that static is happening because you talk about, the National Association of Realtors drops this change. The news media drops the news about the change, but then they're sort of like, okay, well, here's this, and here's a few new forms, and we're good luck. And so we're left to kind of deal with the aftermath, which I kind of look at as a ripple effect. They drop this in the pond, and then here we are having to kind of deal with that, what it looks like. And what it looks like is there's different engagement based on different outlook and philosophies and policies of different companies, even locally. So you're having different companies that have a different outlook or say, no, there's an opportunity for us to kind of tweak the way we do business, or we see this differently. Yeah. We think the best strategy for a seller is X, and then another company thinks it's Y. And so there's a beauty in that all being opened up for possibility. But with that comes some confusion, and things are, we had a system that was in place for decades. When you break it apart, everybody's trying to figure out sort of what's the next thing, and they're having to navigate a different channel than they've been used to for a long time.
Right, and maybe, Chip, it's just because it's football season, but I'm thinking about everything that way. College football season.
Yeah,
but anyway, so here's how I see what you just said if you relate it to sports. The rules have changed, but behind the scenes, in the huddle, there's still strategy. They're going to handle those rule changes differently.
Of course.
And so there's not uniformity across the board. Everybody's not doing everything exactly the same way. Now, what everybody's trying to do is be compliant.
Sure.
Be ethical, be legal, be compliant, and all of that stuff. But there's maybe different pathways to get there.
Great analogy, and I think that that's very much what's happening. And so it's created a little friction, a little confusion, a little bit of a variety in term agent to agent trying to figure it out, navigate it on behalf of their clients. And I think with buyers, on the buyer side, the notion of having to sign some kind of written agreement before going out and touring properties, even if you're touring them, like so many cases, we're touring with our buyer clients and customers virtually, walking around with a phone and doing Zoom and all that kind of stuff. I think that's a friction point for buyers right now is like, hey, you're kind of, as we said in our last video, like, hey, you're kind of pushing that up the timeline a little bit. And I don't know what that means to me. So there's a friction point there we're super sensitive to. The good news is that we have developed a bunch of resource information that is available on our website. We've got information that we're sending out via text. We've got mobile version PowerPoint presentations that we're sending out to our buyer clients. It's all about education. And at the core of that, you talked about this in terms of like buyer strategy meetings. That's a hugely important meeting. To have that, whether it's virtual or in person, is great. Sit down in the office and let's just talk. And I think what we're finding is that buyers are learning. They're digging into the transaction more. What does a buyer agent really do for me? And what's the benefit to me? And then, how are you getting paid? And what is that? And how does that translate into the transaction? Those are all blossoming conversations, which is something we absolutely love because we've always embraced this buyer consultation, this strategy session which says, what are you trying to achieve? How can we be the key player in that? What are the next steps? And getting somebody comfortable with partnering up to move forward in that transaction.
Yeah, I expect a lot of excitement in this tail end of this year. We've only tracked this for 2 weeks now,
right?
But we kind of get a sense. We've engaged with a ton of agents across the board, all over a bunch of different companies. So we've got a real good sense of how the market's behaving, how the market's responding, and how to best help navigate our clients through there.
Absolutely, which is something we've always done, right? And so for us, I'd make it just a little bit about Collins Group, but for those of us that have been watching us for a long time now, pushing towards 23 years, we are system-based. We are client-focused. We are a high-level service organization. As sellers and buyers start to dissect what the transaction really is, what the agent role really is, where value comes out, starting to feel like it's a moment for us to shine. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons we've seen that uptick compared to the market. So we're certainly hopeful for them.
Absolutely.
Anyway, that's what's happening, guys. Here 2 weeks in, we'll continue to keep you posted. Appreciate always your interest in what we've got to say here in the Low Country market. And we'll talk to you all soon.